To discuss the impact it's having, please welcome the founder and chair of the Climate Reality Project, Vice President Al Gore, Leon Firth, Eugene Cordero, and General Stephen Cheney. Thank you so much for being here. People sometimes have a hard time relating all these issues to national security, climate change, political instability. General Cheney, is there a connection between climate change and national security?
Oh, Jeanette, there's a direct connection. With the instability that's going on in the world, of course, where we've been in the last 10 or 11 years, Iraq and Afghanistan, you might not necessarily connect climate change to that, but it's there. And I can tell you, when we drive Al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan, they go to Yemen, where there's now huge climate problems in Yemen. Al-Qaeda is taking advantage of that instability. They're doing the same thing, and they're moving down to Somalia, the Horn of Africa, and over to Mali. All this turmoil, or a significant portion of it, is attributable to drought and climate change and lack of food. And another part of it with the Russian fires in 2010, then the grain prices shot up, then you had more instability in the Arab Spring. This fosters terrorism, and those who can harbor terrorists, they take advantage when there's no government to control it. So there is a direct connection, in my opinion, between national security and climate change.
Now, Leon, what do we understand about the relationship between climate change and social instability?
First of all, every civilization and every society lives in its own environmental niche. They start under conditions where weather, climate are predictable enough to create civilizations, and the study of long-range history shows us that they perish when those conditions change in ways to which they cannot adapt. And we also know that along the way towards that final collapse, there are instances when in a struggle for survival, nation will fall on nation, and tribe on tribe, and neighbor on neighbor. So it presses us all together and pushes us towards a critical tipping point.
And General Cheney, what relationship are we seeing between food security being impacted by climate change?
Well, the example I like to use is the tour rates in Mali, where there's drought and food shortage. And they've been a pastoral, fairly quiet group for years and years and years, but have now rebelled up against the government because of the lack of food and lack of water. There is a huge problem there, and now we have proof that Al-Qaeda is infiltrating that area of northern Africa. So this is just going to foster that instability that's there, and of course we know what Al-Qaeda has done to us. So again, there's another direct connection to those who want to do us harm, taking advantage of the instability that's created because of climate change.
Now, earlier you were talking about the Arab Spring. What is the connection, like, for people who are watching us right now?
Well, some would say, and it's a loose connection, but I mentioned the forest fires in Russia in 2010, and then the grain prices shot up, and then in Egypt, the flatbread just went up 40+%. And underneath, deep down, the populace obviously didn't like that or couldn't afford it, and there was considerable unrest. And that was, I think, a huge contributing factor to what went on in Egypt. And as we all know, that spread. It was Tunisia and Libya. You wouldn't think that climate change would have had a hand in that, but it did. And I think that was a contributing factor.
That's very interesting. And now, Leon, climate change has been called a threat multiplier. What does this mean in concrete terms?
I think I just invented the term, but what I meant to convey by it is just it operates as a lever. It takes a given situation which might, without climate change, have required a certain amount of resources and attention to deal with, and multiplies what you have to be able to expend, and possibly raises it beyond your capacity. That's the thing. It's really important when you look at all these things to reach the conclusion the time is up, that what was distant in time has arrived, and the crisis is unfolding.
And the crisis is a reality.
Yes.
Correct? Now, is there a link between climate change and terrorism, Mr. Gore?
Well, the general just outlined one such link. When terrorists often seize targets of opportunity, when there is social unrest, when there is tribal or interethnic conflict, and climate change can enhance those conflicts. The the conflict between herders and farmers is enhanced when the land dries out and when the herds don't get enough forage in the areas that they have been herded into, and they expand into areas that encroach upon farmland. Another connection here that shouldn't be overlooked is population growth. Where there is famine, where there is great stress and child mortality goes up, some people think just reflexively that if more children are dying, then the population goes down. Actually, the exact reverse happens, because when parents do not have confidence that their children will survive into adulthood, they have larger families, they have more children. And in sub-Saharan Africa, even though in the world as a whole we are seeing declining growth rates in population, even though the absolute numbers are still expanding, we've quadrupled population in less than a century, and we're now at 7 billion. We will add another billion in the next 12 to 14 years, and yet another billion in a dozen to 15 years after that, and it may level off around 10 billion. But in Africa, the fertility rate, the number of children per family, is significantly higher than in the rest of the world. In Africa, by mid-century, Africa will have more people than either China or India. And by the end of this century, Africa will have more people than China and India combined. Now, this is a continent made up of nations that include many that are growing and thriving and modernizing and making great progress. But as a whole, the continent is resource stressed. The soil carbon is at dangerously low levels. Water resources are unevenly distributed and in chronically short supply in many areas. And when populations are stressed in this way, a conflict is more likely. And where there is a conflict and chaos, that is also a target of opportunity for terrorism.
Well, that's certainly a situation that many people have not thought through. Now, Leon, what factors should our military planners be taking into consideration as they prepare for the future, considering all these factors that Mr. Gore has mentioned?
In this region or globally?
In this region, and then I'll ask you globally.
Let me start with globally. The melting ice cap in the Arctic has already started a competition among states with sovereign claims to the seabed to assert those claims. And what used to be a theoretical legal notion is now moving rapidly towards the possibility of real competition and real confrontation between states that believe that this is a ticket to the exploitation of energy and mineral rights on a huge scale. That's really dangerous, and it's coming fast. In other parts of the world, it varies, but think about our relations with the Canadians, water rights, fishing rights, our relations with the Mexicans over the division of waters coming from the Rio Grande. This thing stresses every diplomatic relation that you can think of.
And then it has a multiplying effect.
Yes.
Correct?
Yep.
Now, General Cheney, we just saw the National Guard and the Marines called out to respond to the effects of Hurricane Sandy in New York City. Is this a harbinger of things to come?
Let me answer that here in a second. Just to mention one thing that Leon just said about the ice cap. We are the lone non-signatory to the Law of the Sea Convention, which is just unbelievable. Here, because of climate change, the Arctic ice cap is melting, and there's going to be a scramble for mineral rights, yet we won't sign up to the legal convention that's there, which is just a little plug that we need to get on board with that one. Sandy is just the start. It's just the start. Look what's going on in the last 10 years in terms of extreme weather events. Katrina, Irene, on the East Coast we had this amazing derecho. Yesterday we talked about the new normal, and there's nothing normal about it. It's going to continue. It's going to get worse. We have to plan for it. And the sad part about this is when it's an extreme event, you got to call out your soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. Who budgets for that? They got to pay for it some way. We've got to do something about climate change. These events are just these events are just going to continue to occur, and they're going to have to rely on the Department of Defense to help them counteract them.
And how much can you plan for them when these are unplanned events?
Well, hey, they're very good at planning in the Pentagon, I will say that much, and they've got a lot of folks that understand it. Now, again, you go to the climatologists and the scientists and say, or the meteorologists and say, where's the next event going to occur? But, you know, I don't think, they predicted Sandy a ways out, again, a tactical, a short term, a week or two out. A year or two out, nobody here was prepared for that, but they ought to be. They ought to think of what's coming.
And do you think that society has to be teetering on the edge of chaos for climate change to trigger social disruption?
If there's any good that comes out of Sandy, it's the bellwether. It rang the bell for everybody saying, hey, there's something to this. And I think it's the scientists who've said, and the weathermen, that yes, you know, we think climate change had a pretty big hand in the positioning in its left-hand move. And I hate to say it, but it comes at a pretty good time. Coming into sequestration and budget talks, okay, let's talk climate change, and then we can talk carbon tax, which might be a fundraiser and eliminate pollution simultaneously. So, yeah, certainly it's waking us up.
And Eugene, how can we connect climate change to Sandy? Do you consider that there's a direct correlation?
Well, you know, for an atmospheric scientist, that's a challenging question to answer. But one thing we can say for sure is that this is what the ocean temperatures along the Gulf were 5 degrees warmer than they were on average. Sea level is higher than it used to be. Both of those, you know, the enhanced temperatures in the Gulf made that storm stronger. The higher sea levels made the risk to the whole coastal area much more significant. And our models are predicting that these are the kind of things we're going to see more and more likely. So certainly there's going to be storms that are going to keep coming through, but the risk that we are susceptible to is going to be higher as a result of some of these factors. So, and there's this, was mentioned about the melting of the Arctic sea ice, and there's some research from one of our alumni at San Jose State who's looking at how when you melt or change the heating distribution in the Arctic, how that changes the jet stream and the distribution of storms that come across the continental part of North America. And we're not really sure exactly what's going to happen, but the one thing that is pretty clear is things are going to change. And where you normally might have a large amount of winter rain, that might start to shift in some way. So certainly we are seeing these changes, and they're happening now.
And they're going to be happening faster and faster, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, as we continue to put more heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere every year, and most of that heat is being actually absorbed by the ocean. The ocean gives off that heat to the atmosphere. So we are committed already to continued warming for the next 50 years or so, no matter what we do today. And we expect to see those changes become larger and larger.
Leon, can we consider climate change a serious security threat to the United States?
From everything that we've all been saying to each other, it obviously is. It also goes to what you mean by security. If you just mean the ability to deal with your enemies, that's one thing. If it means your ability to try to create an environment for your country which is best for it, its people, and its institutions, then this is a real threat to our security, because it presents a horrible choice between the kind of world that we think we should move towards and the kind of world that we're actually moving towards very rapidly.
If I could add to that answer,
yes, please do.
Every 4 years, the Pentagon puts together what they call the quadrennial review, where the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all of the uniformed military services get together in a very in-depth study of what these security threats are to the United States and how we need to address them. And they have spoken very clearly in saying that, yes, the climate crisis is a threat to security. And we were hearing about how our military has to be deployed when there are climate-related crises that create the potential for chaos and conflict. And we have seen that happen over and over again. If we do not take steps to stop the additional global warming pollution that makes this even worse than it is becoming now, then the security threat would grow worse. And one thing to remember, there are many nation states in the world today, particularly in areas like sub-Saharan Africa, but not only there, that are already in a somewhat fragile condition. They're dealing with a lot of stresses, a lot of problems, and when you add climate-related disasters, when you add dirty weather to it, then some of them are tipped over the edge. And when governments fail, you get situations like we got in Somalia, where there effectively is no government. And then the gangs, the tribes, the terrorist groups, you get a real chaotic situation. And as mentioned already, Yemen is well down the road to that right now. As one analyst said, it is becoming a basket case. Very rapid population growth, severe water shortages, food shortages, a conflict between all kinds of different groups within the country. And we have a military strategy in reserve. Actually, there are activities going on right now. We don't have troops on the ground. I don't mean that. But this is already a national security threat to the U.S.
Well, this is all very, very interesting, but this is all the time that we have for this panel. And now, please stay with us for more on 24 Hours of Reality, the Dirty Weather Report. Get involved. Take the Climate Reality Pledge. Click the green Take the Pledge button at the bottom of your screen. Together, our voice has the power to change the world. We'll be right back.
You've got a voice. You can